It started with an emergency summons, no warning, no leaks, no press. Senior royals rushed into a closed-door meeting inside Buckingham Palace, their expressions tense, their silence louder than words. But it was Princess Anne who broke that silence, delivering a revelation so explosive, it reportedly left even Queen Camilla momentarily speechless. What exactly did Anne uncover, and why now? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. What followed inside those guarded palace walls was not an ordinary discussion, it was something far more controlled, far more deliberate. Reports suggest that the meeting itself had been called in absolute urgency, bypassing the usual layers of royal scheduling that normally take days, even weeks, to arrange. That alone raised questions. When figures like King Charles III and Prince William are summoned without advance notice, insiders whisper that something serious is already in motion long before anyone takes their seat at the table. And yet, even among those present, there appeared to be a divide not of rank, but of awareness. Some knew, others did not. And that imbalance created a tension that reportedly filled the room before a single word was spoken. Palace aides, usually seen moving with quiet efficiency, were said to have been unusually restrained, instructed to step back, to avoid eye contact, to keep distance. Silence became policy. It is now whispered in the highest echelons of royal circles that this level of controlled secrecy is rarely seen unless the matter at hand carries long-term implications for the institution itself. Because this was not just about optics, and it was not about public appearances. This was about something internal, something that, if exposed without control, could ripple far beyond the palace gates. Then came the moment that changed everything. Princess Anne entered not as a participant, but as a force. Those familiar with her role within the monarchy often describe her as steady, unshaken, immune to drama. But this time, according to various interpretations of the meeting, she brought something with her documents, carefully prepared, deliberately timed. And the moment those papers appeared, the atmosphere shifted. It was no longer a discussion. It became a confrontation. What made that moment even more striking was the reaction it triggered. Insiders claim that Queen Camilla, known for maintaining composure under pressure, appeared visibly unsettled. A brief pause, a flicker of tension, small but enough. Enough for those watching to understand that whatever was about to be revealed was not expected, or at the very least, not meant to surface in that way. Meanwhile, Prince William reportedly remained focused, observing closely, as if already aware that this moment could define something far larger than the meeting itself. And as the silence deepened, and the weight of what was unfolding began to settle, one truth became impossible to ignore. This was not a spontaneous accusation. It was something built over time, something carefully uncovered, something that had finally reached the point where it could no longer remain hidden. But what Princess Anne revealed wasn't just shocking, it pointed to a carefully hidden plan that may have been unfolding for far longer than anyone realized. For weeks, something had felt off inside royal circles, quiet movements, unexpected absences, subtle shifts in influence. And now, according to those familiar with palace operations, Anne's claims were not sudden, they were the result of a pattern that allegedly leads straight back to Queen Camilla herself. At first, it was easy to dismiss. Subtle schedule changes, private meetings that never made it onto official records, adjustments that, on the surface, appeared routine, harmless even. But insiders whisper that within the tightly controlled rhythm of royal life, even the smallest deviation carries weight. A delayed appearance here, a canceled engagement there. Patterns began forming, quietly, almost invisibly. And those who understood the system began to notice that these were not isolated incidents. They were connected, carefully, deliberately connected. Reports suggest that influence inside the palace had begun to shift, not dramatically, not in ways that would trigger immediate alarm, but slowly enough to avoid detection. According to those familiar with internal operations, individuals linked to Camilla's extended circle were appearing more frequently in private discussions, not officially, not publicly, but present, always present. The kind of presence that does not announce itself yet leaves a trace in every decision that follows. And while nothing was openly confirmed, the growing alignment between these appearances and key internal decisions began to raise quiet concern among long-standing aides. What made this even more unsettling was the division it reportedly created behind the scenes. Royal aides, normally unified by protocol and duty, were said to be split in ways rarely seen before. Some remained loyal to tradition, to the established order that had governed the monarchy for generations. Others, however, appeared to lean toward this emerging influence, whether by choice or by pressure. And in that divide, tension grew. Not loud, not visible to the public, but deeply felt within the corridors where decisions are shaped long before they are announced. And through all of this, Princess Anne remained silent, watching, listening, observing with a patience that insiders now describe as calculated rather than passive. Because Anne, unlike many, understands the rhythm of the institution, not just how it operates, but how it shifts when something beneath the surface begins to change. It is now whispered that she had been tracking these developments for far longer than anyone realized, connecting details others overlooked, building a picture that was far more complex than it appeared. At the heart of it all was a growing conflict between tradition and transformation. The monarchy has always relied on balance, on a delicate line between evolution and preservation. But what was unfolding behind closed doors felt different. It did not feel like natural change. It felt directed, intentional, and perhaps most troubling of all, it felt concealed. Because if these shifts were truly strategic, then they were not just about influence in the present, they were about control over what comes next. And as that realization began to settle, the weight of Anne's silence took on a new meaning. She was not hesitating. She was preparing. Because in a system built on precision and timing, the moment of action matters just as much as the action itself. And when that moment finally arrived, it would not be subtle. It would not be quiet. It would be undeniable. But observing wasn't enough, and what Anne did next would transform suspicion into something far more dangerous. When Anne finally spoke, she didn't rely on rumors, she brought proof. Documents, timelines, connections that reportedly painted a picture far more calculated than anyone had imagined. And in that moment, the room shifted from doubt to undeniable tension. What she placed before them was not dramatic in appearance, but it carried a weight that insiders now describe as impossible to ignore. Carefully arranged papers, structured notes, a sequence of events that, when seen together, form something far more powerful than isolated claims. According to those familiar with the exchange, Princess Anne did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The strength of what she presented spoke louder than any accusation ever could. Because this was not speculation anymore, it was alignment. Dates matched decisions, movements matched outcomes. And suddenly, what had once been dismissed as coincidence began to look like coordination. Reports suggest that among the documents were references to internal communication, subtle approvals, quiet endorsements, moments where influence appeared to guide outcomes behind the scenes. Nothing overt, nothing that would stand out in isolation. But when placed in sequence, the pattern became harder to deny. Insiders whisper that even those who had remained skeptical until that point began to shift in their seats, not out of discomfort, but out of realization. Because if these connections were accurate, then the narrative unfolding inside that room was no longer about perception, it was about intent. What made the moment even more intense was the way time itself seemed to factor into Anne's presentation. Timelines were not just mentioned, they were emphasized. Specific moments tied to key royal decisions, now aligned with movements that had previously gone unnoticed. Events that once appeared routine were suddenly reframed, revealing layers beneath their surface. And in that reframing, a deeper question began to emerge. Had these actions been part of a longer strategy, carefully built over time, waiting for the right moment to take shape? The reaction inside the room, according to various interpretations, was immediate yet controlled. Senior figures, including King Charles III and Prince William, reportedly fell into a heavy silence, not out of uncertainty, but out of the gravity of what they were processing. Silence, in that moment, became acknowledgement, not of guilt, not of innocence, but of significance. Because once such a pattern is seen, it cannot be unseen. And then there was Queen Camilla. Insiders claim her response was subtle but measured words, controlled reactions, yet layered with a defensiveness that had not been present before. It was not an outburst. It was something quieter, more contained. But in a setting where every gesture carries meaning, even restraint can speak volumes. Because the atmosphere had changed. What began as a formal gathering had now shifted into something far more direct, far more confrontational. Lines, once blurred, were beginning to take shape. And as that tension deepened, one reality became impossible to ignore. This was no longer about interpretation. It was about consequence. Because if the evidence truly held weight, then the foundation of trust within that room had already begun to crack. And once that happens, the ripple does not stay contained. It spreads, slowly at first, then all at once. But if the evidence was real, then the implications were far more serious than a simple internal disagreement. As the pieces came together, a narrative began to form, one that insiders now describe as a quiet strategy, rather than a coincidence. And at the center of it all was a question no one dared to ask out loud. Was this a deliberate move to reshape royal power? What had once seemed like scattered decisions, small adjustments buried within the machinery of royal operations, now began to align into something far more deliberate. Reports suggest that influence was not being applied in obvious ways, but rather through subtle positioning decisions that shaped outcomes without ever appearing to control them. Those familiar with the structure of palace governance understand how rare such precision is. And yet, according to whispers within those inner circles, this precision was exactly what made the situation so unsettling. Because if power is being shifted quietly, then it is far more difficult to challenge. At the center of these growing concerns were claims that certain roles, key roles tied to both visibility and long-term planning, had been influenced in ways that favored a particular direction. Insiders allege that these were not random appointments or routine adjustments, but calculated placements designed to shape the future from within. It was not about immediate control. It was about positioning for what comes next. And in a system built on continuity, that kind of positioning carries weight far beyond the present moment. The deeper implication, however, was not just about influence, it was about legacy. Because according to various interpretations, there were growing fears that these moves could secure advantages not just for the present circle, but for those connected to it in the years ahead. A long game, a quiet consolidation. The kind of strategy that does not demand attention, but gradually reshapes the balance of power until it becomes the new normal. And for those committed to preserving tradition, that possibility was deeply troubling. Concerns began to surface carefully, cautiously, about whether these actions represented a departure from the principles that have long defined the monarchy. The institution has always relied on structure, on a system where roles are not claimed but earned, not shaped by personal ambition but guided by duty. And yet what was being described behind closed doors seemed to blur that line. Not in a way that could be easily proven, but in a way that could be felt. And sometimes, within such a rigid system, feeling is enough to raise alarm. Throughout this unfolding tension, Prince William reportedly remained intensely focused, not reactive, not impulsive, but observant. Insiders claim he followed every detail, every connection, as if measuring not just the present situation, but its potential consequences. Because for him, this was not just about what had already happened, it was about what could still happen if left unchecked. And that awareness added a new layer of gravity to the room. Meanwhile, King Charles III was said to appear increasingly conflicted, torn between personal loyalty and institutional responsibility. His position became more complex with every revelation, because at the heart of it all was not just a question of actions, but of relationships. And when those two collide, the path forward is never simple. It demands decisions that carry both emotional and historical weight. And as the tension reached its peak, one thing became painfully clear: this was no longer a question of whether something had happened. It was a question of what would be done about it, because once a pattern is recognized, ignoring it is no longer an option. And just when it seemed the room couldn't grow more divided, Anne made one final move that changed everything. Known as the monarchy's most unshakable figure, Princess Anne didn't hesitate. With calm precision, she reportedly delivered a statement that insiders now describe as a line in the sand. It wasn't just a warning, it was a declaration. There was no raised voice, no dramatic interruption, no outward display of emotion. And yet, according to those familiar with the moment, her words carried a force that immediately changed the direction of the room. Because Anne did not speak in uncertainty. She spoke with clarity, with certainty, with a weight that seemed to echo beyond the meeting itself. At the core of her statement was something simple, yet unyielding the preservation of royal protocol, not as a suggestion, not as a preference, but as a foundation that cannot be altered without consequence. And in that moment, the conversation was no longer about interpretation. It became about boundaries. Reports suggest that Anne's words directly addressed the growing concerns that had been quietly building beneath the surface. Not by naming individuals, but by challenging the actions themselves. Actions that, according to insiders, were now being framed as deviations from the very structure that has sustained the monarchy through decades of change. Because for Anne, this was never about personal conflict. It was about principle, about the invisible rules that hold everything together, even when the outside world sees only ceremony and tradition. And once those rules are questioned, the stability of the entire system begins to shift. What made her statement even more powerful was the support it began to gather in real time. Prince William, long seen as the future of the institution, was reportedly aligned with her position not through overt declarations, but through quiet agreement, through attention, through presence. Insiders claimed that this alignment carried significant weight, signaling that this was not an isolated stance, but the beginning of something broader, a reinforcement of values that extend beyond any single moment or individual. And in that alignment, the tone of the meeting shifted once again from tension to confrontation, from uncertainty to direction. At the same time, the divide within the room became impossible to ignore. What had once been subtle differences in perspective were now clearly defined lines. On one side, those who believed in maintaining the structure as it has always been. On the other, those who appeared connected to the emerging shifts that had sparked this entire moment. And between those sides stood King Charles III, reportedly carrying the weight of both loyalty and responsibility, his silence reflecting the complexity of a position that no one else in that room could fully understand. Meanwhile, Queen Camilla was said to have been placed into an increasingly defensive position, not through direct accusation, but through the undeniable pressure of what had been presented. Insiders describe a shift in posture, in tone, in response a careful navigation of a situation that had clearly moved beyond control. Because when the foundation of an argument begins to crack, maintaining composure becomes its own challenge. And in that moment, every word, every pause, every reaction carried meaning. As the exchange reached its peak, the emotional weight of the room became impossible to ignore. This was no longer a quiet discussion behind closed doors. It was a defining moment, a clash between preservation and change, between duty and influence, between what has always been and what might be trying to become. And as that realization settled into every corner of the room, one truth became undeniable: whatever happened next would not stay contained within those walls. But the consequences of that moment didn't end in that room, they were only just beginning. Once the doors closed and the meeting ended, the real impact began to unfold. Quiet conversations, sudden decisions, subtle shifts that signaled something had changed within the royal structure, and it wasn't going unnoticed. The silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy, deliberate, filled with meaning that did not need to be spoken aloud. Reports suggest that almost immediately, internal reviews began to take shape, not public, not announced, but quietly initiated behind the same walls where the confrontation had just taken place. These were not routine evaluations. According to those familiar with palace operations, they carried a different kind of urgency, one driven not by maintenance, but by reassessment. Because when trust is questioned at the highest level, everything beneath it must be examined. Palace aides, often invisible to the public yet essential to the monarchy's function, reportedly found themselves adjusting roles in ways that reflected this new reality. Responsibilities were shifted. Access was reconsidered. Conversations became more guarded. It is now whispered that even long-standing routines began to change, not dramatically, but enough to signal that something deeper was being recalibrated. Because within such a tightly controlled system, even the smallest operational change can carry significant meaning. At the same time, scrutiny intensified. Decisions that once passed without question were now being examined with a level of attention that insiders describe as unprecedented in recent years. Every approval, every recommendation, every movement within the system began to carry weight, not because they were new, but because they were now being seen through a different lens, a lens shaped by what had been revealed, a lens that no longer allowed assumptions to go unchallenged. And in that shift, a quiet tension began to spread through the structure itself. Beyond the palace, the outside world began to sense it too. The media, often reliant on subtle cues and unspoken signals, started to pick up on changes that could not be easily explained. Reports grew cautious. Language became measured. But between the lines, something was there, a growing awareness that the image of unity may not fully reflect the reality within. And while nothing was confirmed, the absence of clarity only fueled deeper speculation. Because when information is withheld, attention only sharpens. Inside royal circles, that same awareness took on a more personal form. Insiders described the atmosphere as an uneasy, fragile balance between control and uncertainty. Conversations became quieter, more deliberate. Trust, once assumed, now required reinforcement. And beneath it all, there was a shared understanding that the events of that meeting had not resolved anything. They had simply revealed what had been hidden. And as speculation began to grow, so did the weight of what might come next. Because the consequences of such a moment do not unfold all at once. They build, slowly, quietly, until they reach a point where they can no longer remain contained. The question was no longer whether there would be an impact, it was how far that impact would reach. And yet, despite the silence, one question continued to echo louder than ever. Has the monarchy reached a turning point? For the first time in years, insiders are openly questioning whether unity within the royal family can truly hold, or if deeper fractures are beginning to surface beneath the polished image. What once appeared steady now feels uncertain. Reports suggest that behind the carefully managed appearances, a quiet shift is taking place, one that cannot be easily dismissed or explained away. The idea of a united front, long considered the monarchy's greatest strength, is now being examined with growing skepticism. Not because it has collapsed, but because subtle signs are beginning to suggest that it may no longer be as unshakable as it once seemed. And in a system where perception is everything, even the smallest crack can carry enormous weight. Public appearances, once routine and predictable, are now being watched with a different kind of attention. Every gesture, every interaction, every moment of silence is being analyzed, not for what is shown, but for what might be hidden beneath it. Insiders whisper that what used to pass unnoticed now draws quiet scrutiny, as observers attempt to read between the lines of carefully composed moments. Because when tension exists behind closed doors, it rarely stays completely invisible. It finds ways to surface subtly, quietly, but unmistakably for those who know where to look. Amid this growing uncertainty, Prince William's role has begun to stand out more than ever, not through dramatic statements or overt actions, but through presence, through consistency, through a sense of direction that insiders now describe as increasingly significant. Because in times of instability, attention naturally shifts toward the future, and William represents that future. A figure expected not just to inherit the institution, but to guide it through moments exactly like this. His quiet observation during the earlier confrontation now carries new meaning, suggesting not hesitation, but preparation. At the same time, King Charles III finds himself under a different kind of pressure. Not the pressure of public duty, but the pressure of balance, between loyalty and responsibility, between personal relationships and institutional stability. Insiders claim that this position has become increasingly complex, requiring decisions that are not just strategic, but deeply personal. And when those two forces collide, the path forward becomes far less certain, because every choice carries consequences that extend far beyond the present moment. Meanwhile, Queen Camilla's position continues to face growing scrutiny. Questions that once remained unspoken are now being quietly explored, not just by insiders, but by those observing from the outside. Her role within the evolving structure is no longer seen as fixed, but as something that may be influenced by the events that have already unfolded. And in that uncertainty, the balance of influence begins to shift in ways that are still difficult to fully measure. Through it all, one figure remains steady: Princess Anne. Insiders increasingly describe her as the stabilizing force at the center of this unfolding moment, not because she seeks attention, but because she embodies consistency. In a time where questions are multiplying and clarity feels distant, her presence offers something rare: certainty, a reminder of the principles that have guided the monarchy through far more turbulent times. And yet, even with that sense of stability, the broader picture remains unresolved. Because moments like this do not define themselves immediately. They unfold, they evolve, they reshape the structure piece by piece until the full impact becomes clear. And as that process continues, one truth stands above all others: the monarchy is not standing still. It is changing, whether by design or by circumstance. But if this moment revealed anything, it's that the story isn't over, not even close. What began as a closed-door meeting has now turned into one of the most talked-about royal moments in recent memory. And while much remains unconfirmed, one thing is certain: Princess Anne's bold move has reshaped the conversation around power, loyalty, and the future of the crown. In the days that followed, the weight of that moment did not fight, it expanded. What had once been contained within palace walls began to ripple outward, touching every corner of royal life. Reports suggest that conversations once considered routine were now being reframed, viewed through a new lens shaped by what had unfolded. Because when a figure like Anne steps forward with such precision and certainty, it does not simply resolve a situation, it redefines it. Her reputation, already built on decades of unwavering duty, has now taken on an even sharper edge. Insiders describe her not just as a stabilizing force, but as the monarchy's most reliable guardian. Someone who does not bend under pressure, someone who acts when others hesitate. At the same time, the implications for Queen Camilla have become impossible to ignore. While nothing has been formally confirmed, the questions surrounding her influence have only grown louder. What was once subtle speculation has now moved into open discussion, with insiders quietly debating what this moment means for her position within the royal structure. Because influence within the monarchy is not just about presence, it is about trust. And once that trust is questioned, even indirectly, the consequences can extend far beyond a single event. Public curiosity, meanwhile, has reached a level that cannot be easily contained. The absence of clear answers has only intensified interest, drawing attention to every appearance, every gesture, every moment that might offer a clue about what is really happening behind the scenes. Media outlets, analysts, and observers alike have begun to examine the monarchy with renewed focus, searching for signs that reflect the internal tension now widely believed to exist. And in that scrutiny, the carefully maintained image of unity faces a new kind of pressure, one that does not rely on facts alone, but on perception, on interpretation, on the growing sense that something fundamental may be shifting. For the monarchy itself, this moment represents more than just a controversy. It represents a test of resilience, a test of structure, a test of whether the balance between tradition and change can truly hold under strain. Because the institution has always relied on its ability to adapt without losing its core identity. Yet what has emerged here feels different. It feels like a moment where that balance is no longer stable, where the line between preservation and transformation has become dangerously thin. And within that fragile space, every decision now carries greater weight. Prince William's growing presence, King Charles III's quiet deliberation, and Anne's unmistakable authority all point toward a future that is still being shaped in real time. A future where the consequences of this moment will continue to unfold, step by step, decision by decision, long after the initial shock has passed. Because in the end, the real question isn't what was revealed, but what happens next. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.